I have to put a different hat on now because Claire kindly invited me in all the planning for this event to actually take some time to talk about my own research in the BFRB community, which I wouldn't normally have done. So thank you, Claire. I am a social anthropologist, which means I do research with people, and the research that I'm going to be talking about is slightly different to the stuff you've already heard. So hopefully it adds a bit of that extra wheel that Claire was talking about the anthropological perspectives. The word biosolidarity is my own, and I'm going to explain to you a little bit what that means. The image here is by the incredible Liz Atkin, who's in the audience somewhere, one of her many representations of skin picking, anxiety and depression, which I'm sure many of you can resonate with. So what is anthropology and what have I been doing? Anthropology in general is the study of people and non-humans. But for me, my avenue into anthropology and the reason I have become an anthropologist almost accidentally is because it allows me to combine activism. It's a very applied field and it allows you to think about things theoretically, but really to spend time with people, to get to know them over a long period of time and to make your research have an impact in their lives, hopefully. So for me, the research I ended up doing, and it was never my plan to go into researching BFRBs after living with them for most of my life, but I was fortunate enough to have that opportunity. I did my research between 2014 and 2019, and we call it ethnography. Ethnographic fieldwork is the method that anthropologists use, and it really means in-depth interviews, but hanging out with people. So we call it participant observation, which is participating, observing, but really over at least a year. So my fieldwork was 18 months. I spent time traveling up and down the UK. I was in the United States meeting with incredible people doing work over there. And I wanted to understand what hair pulling, skin picking and body focused repetitive behaviors actually look like in the everyday spaces in which people experience them. Of course, we have those clinical research settings where people are coming in, they're invited to take part in research. I wanted to go into the spaces that were hidden and where people were actually hiding away. And so that meant building a great deal of trust with my research participants and seeking them out. It meant that I built unbelievable friendships and it meant that we today have BFRB UK and Ireland, because what began then is where we have ended up now, and that's thanks to the research community, my collaborators, including Pavitt, with whom I started these support groups in 2015. So what happened during my fieldwork, and really what brought me here, is that I realized people are so alone. I was doing interviews with people one-to-one, and for many of them, I was the first person they had ever spoken to about their hair pulling, their skin picking. And so I was meant to be an anthropologist. I actually ended up becoming more of a therapist or a counselor, right? And that wasn't my intention, and that is not what I'm trained in. So I realized very quickly that people need more than just me, and I can only do so much. And so that's why Pavitt, who was also taking part in my research and spending time with me and inviting me into her life, decided we had to do something practical. So we started running the support groups, and that's very much part of my research trajectory. And it wasn't the plan, but I think I'm very grateful that that's how it's ended up. So just a little bit about anthropology as a field. It's, in many ways, it draws on social theory, so it's influenced by philosophy and sociology. It helps us to answer key questions about what it means to be human. So it is very theoretical on the one hand, but because we do long-term fieldwork and we hopefully build relationships with the communities we work with, it has very practical elements. So the thing I like about anthropology is it allows us to bring together theoretical and practical questions and methods. And some of the inspirational people I've been drawing from lately, like Bell Hooks, a Black feminist, scholar, cultural theorist, remind us that theory is not restricted to the academy, right? Theory should not be in the institution and practice should not be in the real world. And the way I practice anthropology and the way I understand the importance of the work I'm doing is that it has to bridge the two. And so this is not typical for all academic fields, and I think that we have a long way to go. But this is also what today is about, right? Is bringing together community members and scientists, and the importance of communicating our research across a wide range and to lots of different audiences. So bell hooks talks about theory as a process of thinking, critiquing and making sense of what's happening in our lives and putting that into words. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about my theoretical journey and how it relates to reflecting on the world around us for BFRBs. So she also says that when we're theorizing, we have to draw on our own lived experience. And that's where all the discussions we've been having today about who we are, our identities, our cultural backgrounds, our environments shape not only how we experience health and illness, but also how we do research. And so in the final panel today, when we're thinking about the importance of lived experience for those of us researching BFRBs, it's been central to my work. And I think that we've seen in all of the work that we've heard from today, how important it can be to combine those two things. So just a little bit about diagnosis. I'm using the example of trichotillomania, not to ignore or skin picking and other BFRBs, but when I was doing my fieldwork, I realized that on the one hand, the clinical psychologists and psychiatrists I was having conversations with in the United States told me that the DSM didn't matter, right? That it was, yes, it was a manual, it was a guide, but it doesn't mean anything. These labels don't mean anything. But in my conversations with people who have BFRBs, they mean everything. Finding out that your hair pulling has a name, has a label, is a medical condition, a disorder, is life-changing. We heard that from Jude's talk this morning when she said that when she was growing up, it literally wasn't in the DSM, right? So being in the DSM and what that signifies to people is profound. You can see this is an image I took from one of the Facebook support groups during my fieldwork period where somebody has literally tattooed the code from the DSM on their arm, right? This is how important it is to be recognized, to have recognition. But the interesting thing about diagnosis for those of us in the BFRB community is that it does not lead to traditional avenues of care. So while the medical labels are very important, we also reach a diagnostic dead end when we get to the clinic because people don't know what to do with us. So you have the language, we go armed with this legitimacy into the doctor's office and say, I have this thing. What do we do? I'm sorry, we can't help you, right? So where do people go for care? What does care look like? And so this is a very interesting problem because we hope that medicalization and creating pathological labels will lead us towards certain medical care and therapeutic avenues when actually that isn't happening for our community. And so care means something else. Recovery has to mean something else. So these are just some of the things that have been emerging. What I realized is that care comes in the community. Care is grown in the community. And the main theoretical basis for this, and ignore some of these citations if it's boring, but the thing that kept coming up in my work is that what happens when people find this label is that and then they realize there isn't a therapeutic place to go for care, is that they also realize there are other people out there that might have this label. And this is what you see in the room today. To be surrounded by people, whether it's online or in person, who actually share this problem, this disorder, is where care begins to happen and recovery begins to happen, in my experience. It's what we see in the support groups. It's what we see at these conferences. It's what we've experienced over the years of the work we're doing. It's what we want for people in the future. But the term that anthropologists have used to describe this sociality, right, this coming together of other people who share this label, is biosociality. So the bio being the body, the embodied experience, maybe the biomedical experience, and the sociality that brings those people together. But what I was reading about biosociality didn't go far enough for me. It talked very, very briefly about activism. It said, yeah, biosocial groups, they come together and that's meaningful and maybe they'll advocate for themselves and that will help. What I was seeing in the BFR community and what I've seen through my experience of building this community with my collaborators is that activism and awareness raising is absolutely central. When we have a community that is invisible, that is hidden, that is not being recognized, we have to work, and that comes from the community themselves. So I came up with this new word, biosolidarity, to give value and to recognize the actions that people are doing in their everyday lives. And it's so significant for our community because we've been in hiding for so long. So the person really, I saw lots of examples of this in my fieldwork, but the person that perfectly represents it is Liz, who's hiding at the back of the room. Liz You will hear more tomorrow about her work if you're coming tomorrow. But Liz Atkin is a visual artist, an activist, a skin picking advocate, and many other wonderful things. Liz's story is worth hearing from her herself, but her series called Compulsive Charcoal is basically where Liz would sit on the train and scribble all over newspapers on her journey through London on her way to work to manage her skin picking. And it became a platform, a way for her to manage the urges in a very practical and beautiful way. But what happened to Liz was that people started asking her, why are you drawing all over the newspapers and the tube? This is a bit strange. And Liz was brave enough to start a conversation and say, I draw because I pick my skin. I have this disorder. And then she started handing out these pictures to people and signing them and going viral on Twitter. That is biosolidarity. That is Liz taking action in a small way, and the ripple effect of that, and the many people then that Liz has reached, and the people that would say to her, "I do this too," right? That through those connections and through that awareness raising, we find others that then can reach the community and can build those relationships and work towards a support group or a care network. And so biosolidarity can be seen everywhere, but it's really giving the attention and the recognition to the work, the labor that goes into this. Right? BFRB U&I did not happen overnight. This is 10 years in the making. It depends on the care, the labor, the sustainability of those of us involved. It's not easy work, right? And I think that's what it's also recognizing, is that biosocial groups don't simply exist. They are created and they have to be sustained. And that takes a lot of work, particularly for a community that struggle with day-to-day things. So for me, biosolidarity is also a research method, right? It emerged from my research, and I've been amazed since I published on this a few years ago to see how it has been taken by other researchers into other areas of research. So people are using it in terms of queer studies, long COVID, chronic fatigue, all sorts of things. So the potential for theory to travel and to become something new, I think, is really beautiful. And just on the point of the DSM, I think it's important to mention that the community, the international BFRB community, were actually pivotal in changing the diagnostic criteria there, right? The TLC Scientific Advisory Board was strongly driven by the grassroots community that came out of that. So the community, those of us who struggle with these disorders, we have power. We have power to change our labels, to change our diagnosis for the better, in order to seek that representation that we think we deserve. I think I'm running out of time. I was so strict with timekeeping earlier, and now I'm rabbiting on. 3 minutes, okay. So this is just the other side, right? That there are limits to this approach, and more I'm drawn to the disability studies and the CRIP studies, the CRIP scholarship that's coming out of disability activism, who are strongly pushing back against psychiatric labels and pathologization of experiences. And in particular, language like disorder is actually frowned upon now, right? So how do we balance that? And I think the neurodiversity movement has been so important here because it does send that message of acceptance, and that there isn't anything wrong with us, that we are just on a spectrum of difference, and that we have to embrace that. And that sits somewhere between the kind of medical model of disability, where there's a problem with the person, we have to fix it, and the social model, which is we need to change the environment. And Claire hit that nail on the head this morning when she talked about the primates. But there is an in-between. And some scholars have called this a political relational model, which basically accounts for the way that our politics, our histories, our culture shape these labels in the first place, and the way that people relate to them and change them. But for me, that's essential, because for me, not to use the word disorder when I talk about BFRBs would do an injustice to the community who use that word frequently, right? That is a word that people use, and we have to give value to that. But we also have to recognize that the acceptance narratives are present. And so our community seems stuck between the two right now. And maybe things will keep changing, and maybe we will adopt more of the neurodiverse approach. And I'd love to see the way that research is going. But I think for now, it's not one or the other. And the good thing that anthropology can do, I think, is to highlight the complexity, the nuance, and the messiness. Not all experiences, in fact, no experiences of humans fit neatly into a box. The BFRB community crosses so many different boundaries. We have never really belonged anywhere, and I think that's okay. We straddle many different, areas, and I think the research has to reflect that. We have to advance our methods, our approaches to be more diverse and incorporate interdisciplinary perspectives. But anthropology really is the perfect tool for me because it's allowed me to combine the friendships, the collaboration, the activism, and to see the value that our research can have in people's everyday lives. Thank you.